Today on The State of Us, was 2022 a good year? It might have been better than you think. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. We do ourselves a disservice, Lance, if we fail to give progress its due. Despite the pervasive gloom about the present and future, far more went right in 2022 than most of us actually recognize.
Well, it's that age-old philosophical question, right? Of is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Some might argue that, well, the glass never got any water put in it in 2022, but I think those are the real pessimists. But, you know, that whole pessimist, optimist outlook is that we tend to focus, right, on those negative things that go on, that happen in our lives, and they lead us to be depressed, or we look at, oh, things are horrible out there in the world, and we don't take time to see the good things that are going on. And therefore then, well, we would be happier. And if we're happier, we're maybe doing more nice things for others, which would then make the world a better place. So I think today's show, it kind of comes down to what are you and what do you focus on what's going on in the world? Like, what's the first good news that we can give people about 2022?
Yeah, well, a big one, and this is all from an article in the Wall Street Journal, which, of course, we'll link at thestateofus.org. The first one is, even though, you know, there was a lot, and the author points this out, right? It's not saying that nothing went wrong in 2022, but we all know that stuff went bad in 2022. I mean, that shouldn't, if anybody's listening to this show and doesn't know that, you must be a new listener, but
and we'll concede that, right? We'll concede that
absolutely.
There were horrible things that took place.
Lots of bad stuff.
But the point of the article is we'll stop and smell the roses and let's talk about some of the good things that did occur.
Well, and it's always fun when we run across somebody, Lance, that says something that we've been saying for years and who's, you know, more of a professional or whatever than we are. And the author points out that people respond more powerfully and immediately to anger, outrage, and fear than they do to hope and calm. That makes it difficult for good news to stand out, but we do ourselves a disservice if we fail to give progress its due. And that leads us to the first piece of progress. Everybody remembers the midterms, I would imagine, and everything leading up to them and all the hubbub and all this and that. And you could say, that's not really a sign of good news, is it? Well, but let's look at the full picture of the midterms, right? The full picture is that despite all of the terrible predictions and all of the awfulness, things really didn't change a lot. I mean, yes, you know, the House is going to be controlled by Republicans, but just barely. So it's not like there was a huge shift. The Senate isn't changing hands. And when you look at everything holistically, the biggest and possibly most notable point about this that's not Republican or Democrat is that the elections happened and that the losers conceded defeat and democracy continued on, despite the number of people that we saw post 2020 election claiming that, you know, everything's now, you know, just a game and there is no truth and all this. And that didn't seem to happen.
Well, you know,
and there were record turnout among young voters.
That's what I was going to say. You know, you had a huge turnout for a midterm election. Got people out, and I'm not going to get into the Democrat or Republican. I don't care. The fact that it went off and it doesn't seem like we haven't heard any horrible stories about, you know, voter fraud or rigged elections or anything else. You know, there's a couple of the Trumpites in Arizona that, you know, tried to make a few waves and that kind of thing. But to your point, anecdotally, I have somebody I know very closely who was working as a poll worker who decided a week before the election to quit because of the threat of violence. And so then I've scoured the newspapers and the news feeds and I can't find any violence. So, I mean, to your point, we quickly forget there was a huge fear of what could happen during the voting process.
And the positive thing is it didn't happen.
And the thing is, nothing happened. I mean, to the point where I'm sure there were other people than the person I know who didn't want to work as a poll worker for fear of what would happen to them. They're going to follow me home. They're going to, blow up my house. They're going to set fire to my car. They're going to, all of those things were real stories, folks, and real fears that people had. And we had an election and none of that happened. And more people than general turned out to vote. So, hey, maybe democracy does work. Because you remember, less than 2 years ago, we all thought democracy was going to fall apart. Oh, can we continue democracy? And you've even seen it in other locations around the world. It's just not a U.S. thing. We haven't seen, yes, you have, Russia, Ukraine, but I'm just talking about we've had, for the most part, peaceful elections around the world, as well as the United States. So democracy, for all of the hoopla of how we were going to lose it, seems to be standing on its feet again, which is a plus. That's a good thing.
Yep. Well, and speaking of the global scene, we couldn't avoid talking about Russia and Ukraine. You and I did a lot on that, and we'll continue to do a good bit on that because we think it's very important that people pay attention to what's happening. And also, we did some shows right on the periphery as well about the concerns of China and what they might be doing with Taiwan. And so lots of scary potential things. You got two of the world's eminent nuclear powers who are making a lot of moves, and that makes people nervous, understandably. But the other side of that, right, is that while the Ukrainian, war that's going on is awful and terrible, and we've talked about that, the other side is look at the humanity that has been shown in response to that as well. With Poland alone taking in 2 million people, I mean, think about, just for a second, try to imagine what 2 million people look like. And Poland's not a very big country, folks. Right. I mean, in terms of taking in 2 million people who do not have jobs or ways to feed themselves or ways to house themselves, or it's not like you got 2 million people who are here to, really boost your country. They're here because they're afraid for their life. And the arms have been opened and come in and, we're not going to shut you out kind of thing. And I mean, that's a nice, feel good thing for terrible reasons it took place. But it's not just feel good things either. Global trade actually is headed for a new high of $32 trillion as of the end of 2022, with notable progress in East Asia as countries are seeking to become less dependent on China and strengthen bonds with one another.
So, to your point, it's like, oh, everybody's becoming nationalistic and nobody's worried about each other and taking care. There are two places right there, right, where other countries are accepting people in to help them during a crisis, and we're trading with one another, and countries are, and here you go, oh, remember the big stockpile of ships out in the Pacific waiting to get into the ports of Los Angeles? Folks, that's gone. Okay. I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago. That's disappeared. It's gone from a 40-day wait to like 12 hours. I mean, you can get in and get your goods. And I don't know if you traveled like I did during the holidays, but there's all kinds of semi-trucks on the road, right? Their products are being delivered. Things are going on. So that has to do with global trade. Things are coming in and going out of the country. So things that we thought in the middle of 2022 were going to just be the death of all of us, and we're just going to cause all kinds of misery for us. It did cause some misery, but guess what? There's good news to be taken from that. There is more good news coming on the horizon for the economy.
Well, and that leads us into inflation, right? I mean, that's something that's dominated this year. Obviously, we talked about the crazy level that we saw gas prices rise to. And we all remember that, right? I mean, well, or most of it, I don't remember that, but everybody else remembers that who actually has to buy gas. And it's like, okay, we get to these crazy prices and oh my gosh, and isn't this terrible? Have you looked at gas prices recently, Lance? Because if you did, you would know that they're almost back to where they were last January, about a year ago. So in other words, the positive there is, right, yes, it's awful that gas prices went to where they did, but it's a good sign of a resilient, strong economy that we can do this up and come back down to where we were. And we did it all in basically a year, Well,
and for all my friends who were putting President Biden on a cross to crucify him for gas prices, are you now all patting him on the back for the fact that gas prices are back down to where they were before? And as I explained to you folks then that were my friends, that, well, the president really doesn't control gas prices. So I'm not sitting here saying, oh, give Biden all the credit. I'm not saying that. But you all, my anti-Biden friends were blaming him for gas prices. Are you giving him the credit now that gas prices are back down?
You weren't blaming him, but you're also not giving him the credit now.
Right. I'm not giving him the credit because I'm not going to be hypocritical, because I explained to those people that it really wasn't the president's fault that gas prices went up in the first place. So if it wasn't his fault, he's really not the reason why they've gone down. It's called the law of supply and demand.
Why does inflation happen? Well, there's lots of different reasons, and Lance nor I are economists, but one of the reasons, a simplistic reason that it happens is because there is more demand than there is supply. Well, generally speaking, inflation's not great because none of us want to pay more for stuff, but the fact that the economy is strong enough, right, and that we as Americans have spending power enough to say that our demand for things is stronger than our ability to supply them is a sign that that's a good thing. The consequence of it's not good, right? The inflation component's not good, but that is a positive thing in that we had a strong, robust demand to spend money, to buy new things, to drive the economy. That is positive. Even if the inflation, the consequence of that is negative, the initial side is, we came through COVID, right? Was COVID terrible in the last few years have been, crazy for a lot of people? Absolutely. They've been wreaking havoc on the economy in different ways. But the other side of that is there wasn't a world war and lots of people died, yes, which is awful and terrible, but society's, for the most part, back up on its feet where it was before the pandemic hit. So I think and that doesn't mean you can't do better, right? It just means that's that perspective thing again of, you could say it was awful that we went through COVID for 2 or 3 years and are still dealing with it. Or you could say, isn't it amazing that we came through it as unscathed as we did? So there's more to talk about, including some breakthroughs in science and technology. And this one, Lance will be excited about, not the science component as much, but the good news with children. Hey, we got some good news about kids. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Before we dive into good news about children, which I'm sure Lance will eat up, you got a gift from a listener of the show.
I did.
For the holidays, and it's how appropriate, 365 new words for the year.
Yep.
So it's this, it looks like a calendar book, folks. Some of our listeners probably don't know what that looks like, but it's a small square rectangular thing that's 2 inches thick by maybe 6 by 6 or something like that. It's a little booklet, and you've got you can rip out, right, the page, and it tells you the word and some history about it. So we're changing the word of the day a little bit from how we did things in the past, but we will now talk about.
We're going to give you a word every day that you listen to the show that you can try to work into your everyday talk. And so we're not going to be competitive with it, but we are going to inform you and have a discussion about it, right? And help us all learn a little bit more. So today's word is lachrymose. 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 And it means, it's an adjective, and it means given to tears or weeping, tearful. An example of the word being used: when asked why she had been crying, Carla explained that she had been watching one of those lachrymose TV soap operas. And historically,
This is the part, folks. This is the whole reason that we've changed the format, is because it's got this. I mean, credit to the listener, right, that figured this out, because you got a little history tidbit and you get your, yeah.
But it's good. And Justin likes this too, so it's not just me.
No.
But the adjective lachrymose comes from the Latin lacrimosus.
Lacrimosus.
From the noun lacrima, meaning tear. Lachrymose didn't appear in the English language until around 1727, but another closely related adjective can be traced back to the 15th century. The earlier cousin, lacrimal, has a scientific flavor and is defined as of relating to or being glands that produce tears. In contrast, lachrymose, our word, typically applies to someone who is moved to tears because of strong emotions or to something that stimulates such feelings. So it's like most of our listeners, they're moved to tears, either with excitement or boredom, but they are moved to tears. So we have a lachrymose audience.
So good news about children.
Okay.
A reason to not be lachrymose, right?
All right. Well, maybe your tears of joy.
Well, you were okay. So see, lachrymose doesn't have to be
Being
negative,
strong emotion, right? It means, and happiness is, we're talking today, right?
Yes.
Happiness is an emotion as well. So,
and it can produce
tears.
Profound impacts. 2022 benefited from a multi-year trend of declining poverty overall. Excellent, right? And especially childhood poverty trends evident throughout much of the world. In the U.S. specifically, 1 in 10 U.S. children are in poverty today, which is awful, but that's down from 1 in 4 in 1993.
Yeah, when I read that, that's amazing, right?
I mean 25% of children were in poverty. And again, there's a lot of different ways to estimate this. So like we're trying to use similar comparisons because you could come up with different numbers, but by this measurement, 1 in 4 in 1993, 1 in 10 today. So is it terrible that 10% of our children live in poverty nationally? Of course. Is that a heck of a lot better than 25%?
But we've cut it in half.
More than half.
Right. So we've done some good things here, right?
We've clearly made headway.
Is the problem solved? No, it's still horrible. It's still horrible that there are children that, go to sleep at night without having had dinner, and they don't have a mattress to sleep on, and they maybe even don't have a roof over their heads. That's horrible in a country like the United States when we claim to be this rich, powerful nation. But it's a whole lot better than it was 30 years ago. So that's, again, something to be positive about. And I want to go back to your inflation bit. Wages. Right? Because wages went up like 6% last year. And
yes.
You say, well, yeah, but inflation was 7 or 8%. Okay, but inflation is now down to like 5% or something like that now, 5.5%.
And as inflation continues to come under control,
your wages are still up that 6%. So yes, your raise last year did not cover inflation in 2022. But as the Fed and everybody else continues to fight the inflation rate and inflation drops below that 6% raise average that the American worker received, you're going to be better off in the future because that raise isn't going to go away and inflation will go down. I mean, who knows what we're going to have to go through to get there, but eventually, well, so there is that, wage components you have to think about. And along with that, to my fellow senior citizens, I do not, I have a retirement fund from being a public educator, but if you're on Social Security, the COLA raise, the cost of living raise this year was 8.5%, 8.7%, something like that. So our senior citizens are doing better. Now you can, I know, again, how do you look at it? Well, yeah, but it's been so long since we got a raise. I'm still way behind and I can't get. Exactly. We can all claim that, right? But there is the positive side of that. You did get one and it's better than the inflation rate last year.
And the other thing is we did an episode in 2020 about how the cost of raising a child has increased dramatically. So that's not good news, or it doesn't seem like it is. But the other side of that is that by spending more, we obviously have made a dent in how many kids live in poverty. And the other reason we're spending more per child, let's remember as well, which we covered from the 1960s through today, is because of the opportunities that children are being given, which we've talked about have increased dramatically from where they were then. More children, more opportunities. Yes, the average cost of raising a child has increased even when adjusted for inflation. But the point there is that that's also because our expectations for what children should have and do has also gone up. So is it good that it costs over $300,000 on average to raise a child? No. But is it good that we've raised our expectations for what all a child should have access to? Probably. So again, that back and forth of inflation's not all good, or inflation itself is bad, right? But there's a flip side and other stories to inflation that are important, like the wages, right? And like what it tells us about the economy and many other things. Same thing with children. Is it good that poverty's down? Absolutely. Is it good that it costs as much as it does to raise a child? No. But the fact that it costs so much is indicative of a society's changing priorities about children, which is a very positive thing. Next up, technology, Lance's favorite.
Gotta love this.
Favorite item. So the technology breakthroughs, there were a lot, but the biggest one probably is the one that you just heard about near the end of the year, which was the first, the way this is specifically worded, right, is for the California's Livermore Laboratory, after many years of efforts, achieving the first viable fusion reaction that resulted in more energy released than was used to create the reaction. So in other words, we've had fusion reactions before. We've had them for years. The problem is that we've always used more energy than was required than was output by the reaction. So in a deficit, why would you do that? That doesn't help solve the energy crisis, right? If
to spend more energy to create an amount of energy
is no good. Mm-hmm. But for the first time, the opposite happened, and the energy input was less than their energy output. Now, it's unclear, if there's going to be more major breakthroughs in fusion technology. The reason this is important, people have been talking about it a long time, is the nuclear technology that we've all become familiar with is called fission, right? And that's F-I-S-S-I-O-N. This is fusion, F-U-S-I-O-N. And there's a very important difference between them. Fusion is where two light atomic nuclei combine to release energy, while fission is the process of splitting two heavy and unstable atomic nuclei into two lighter nuclei, which also releases energy. So fusion actually releases more energy and is done with stable atoms.
So what you're saying, for us laymen out here, it's safer. Fusion is safer than fission. Realistically, you're not going to use nuclear fusion to create a bomb because it won't produce that type of effect. Fission will produce that type of effect. Fission will also produce energy. That's what a bomb is. Sometimes we overcomplicate it, but what a bomb is a huge release of energy. The difference is, are we trying to blow something up or are we trying to harness energy? Well, we've had to make that distinction with our refining of nuclear fuel and so forth. Fusion technology, though, is much more focused on, if we power things with fusion, safer, cleaner, stable, and has the potential to produce way more energy per effort than fission does. So basically, if you think about all the things that we hate about nuclear right now, if all those things just went away and you couldn't make bombs out of it and, it didn't produce terrible nuclear waste and so it's just this massive source of energy that can be delivered in a tiny amount of space. Again, I'm oversimplifying. There's people who study science, and I'm sure listeners out there who are like, but generally speaking, the reason this is a big deal is because it is a step in that direction. It's not like, oh, we're there, but it is a moving in the direction of... It's the success that they've been working for years that they've had. Is it pliable to anything currently? No, but it does lead to now more testing to show that it can be done and a possible solution to our energy crisis down the road.
And basically the important thing there is to understand that a fusion reactor, right, which is basically on a small scale what they're testing, they can't blow up because what you're doing doesn't allow for that to take place. Where fission is a dangerous, process, while if done safely, we talked about that before, there is merit to it, but it inherently has a risk level that fusion does not have because scientifically there are very distinctly different processes. So the day may be coming where when we talk about nuclear energy, the conversation is less nuclear and less, are we talking fission or fusion? Because we've always said nuclear energy, and that's been synonymous with, we're talking about nuclear fission because that's the only type of nuclear that we really use because it's the only type that's viable. Well, now the conversation becomes, you can't just say nuclear, right? Because what are we talking about? Because they're very different. So, and that's potentially a wonderful thing. Either way, progress, right, for the human species. Another progress item to mention, we'll talk about in the next segment, which is both what progress, if any, has been made on the climate, and also maybe a measure of progress is a lack of progress. You might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The climate. We've talked a lot about that, Lance. Got to be worried about what we're doing with the planet, right?
Well, here we are in Ohio, and it's, early January, and it's 60 degrees and raining. It's not normal.
Well, and last week we had a...
Yeah. Right? Couple weeks ago,
we had negative temperatures.
30 with 50-mile-an-hour winds and snow blowing all over the place.
So it changed a little bit.
It has. Okay. I think I was talking to one of my daughters, and she said, yeah, Dad, we had a 90-degree temperature change within 48 hours.
That's pretty impressive.
That's something else, isn't it?
Yeah. Kind of scary, actually. When you think about, about what
know,
has to be taking place up there.
Yeah, there's nothing going on right as far as climate is concerned.
No.
A 90-degree temperature change within a few days. Yeah, but there's nothing happening. Okay.
The U.S. made its largest investment ever in single investment. I mean, we've invested way more than this, historically, but single government investment into clean energy and related programs with the Inflation Reduction Act, which, remember, by the way, wasn't strictly partisan either. I mean, so just as a tidbit about, and
there
the other
was
thing is
another positive, right? There was some bipartisanship.
We covered that in 2022. Yes, there was bipartisanship despite some of the bickering. We got infrastructure passed, which was a bipartisan thing, and included many things for renewable and clean energy. And the rhetoric has changed largely within the Republican Party, right, to not so much saying climate change isn't happening, to now maybe debating what really is the best way to handle it.
Well, we've seen, it's not just the United States, but we've seen countries around the world start to do more things towards decreasing the amount of energy that they use, or, and using more renewable energy sources, so that major reason their economies are going to be affected. We've seen Europe do all kinds of things as they were fearful of what this winter would bring in fuel prices for them, and ways to try to, use what they have very sparingly, and people, trying to be creative in ways to create energy and to stay warm and to do things. And so sometimes, to your point, and then the theme of today's show, in a time of crisis, we start to find out what we are capable of doing to help things become a little bit better. So, we have a power problem, especially with the war going on between Ukraine and Russia, but that's causing people to say, you know what, we need to really address this situation, because we don't want to be held hostage by some country who produces a lot of oil, who then can wreck our economy.
The other thing is, in making the world better, I think it's just important to note the change in what companies say priorities are and the rise of the sort of the trend of certified B corporations. And I don't mean specifically the brand certified B corporations, but I mean corporations that they're operating to make money, but they're trying to have a social impact along with that. In other words, they view it as how can we do both at the same time? And maybe we won't make quite as much money, but we'll still make money. Now, you could say that's all branding, publicity, and all this. And then there's some truth to that. But take, for example, one of the companies that has seen great success despite challenges this year. The company's name is Bombas. They manufacture socks. Oh, well, whoopee-doo, who cares? Their big thing ever since they started, right? So from the very first time they started is every pair of socks you buy, they donate a pair of new socks to homeless shelters. Because why? Socks happen to be the number one most requested item at homeless shelters. And you notice here, there's a very important thing about what I've just told you. I can tell you the story. I know who the company is, right? And they know this. I mean, they're not stupid. It helps them make money. And they've also donated over 80 million clothing items to homeless shelters, and they're only a couple years old. So you could say, are you spending a little bit more for socks? Yes. Do you get to feel better about wearing your socks because you know that somebody else also got a pair of socks? Sure. And are they making money? Yes. Are there investors happy? Yep. So isn't everybody coming out okay on this? You get better socks. You help people who don't have socks, and the company makes money. Seems like a good deal. And that's just one example. I just got an ad the other day, Lance, for a company that is focused now on what do you do with your old clothes? Well, some of us may take them to Goodwill or someplace to resell them or hand them down to somebody else. That's all great. But you know that most clothes end up in a landfill. And we spend a lot of money across the world to produce clothing. So
there's always new styles coming out, and you have to have the latest styles. So what happens to the old clothes, old clothes that you don't wear anymore, right?
Well, now, I mean, and this isn't, again, a revolutionary concept, but now there's a company. It's not a nonprofit. It operates to make money. They will mail you B corporations. And I don't mean specifically the brand certified B corporations, but I mean corporations that they're operating to make money, but they're trying to have a social impact along with that. In other words, they view it as how can we do both at the same time? And maybe we won't make quite as much money, but we'll still make money. Now, you could say that's all branding, publicity, and all this. And then there's some truth to that. But take, for example, one of the companies that has seen great success despite challenges this year. The company's name is Bombas. They manufacture socks. Oh, well, whoopee-doo, who cares? Their big thing ever since they started, right? So from the very first time they started is every pair of socks you buy, they donate a pair of new socks to homeless shelters. Because why? Socks happen to be the number one most requested item at homeless shelters. And you notice here, there's a very important thing about what I've just told you. I can tell you the story. I know who the company is, right? And they know this. I mean, they're not stupid. It helps them make money. And they've also donated over 80 million clothing items to homeless shelters, and they're only a couple years old. So you could say, are you spending a little bit more for socks? Yes. Do you get to feel better about wearing your socks because you know that somebody else also got a pair of socks? Sure. And are they making money? Yes. Are there investors happy? Yep. So isn't everybody coming out okay on this? You get better socks. You help people who don't have socks, and the company makes money. Seems like a good deal. And that's just one example. I just got an ad the other day, Lance, for a company that is focused now on what do you do with your old clothes? Well, some of us may take them to Goodwill or someplace to resell them or hand them down to somebody else. That's all great. But you know that most clothes end up in a landfill. And we spend a lot of money across the world to produce clothing. So
there's always new styles coming out, and you have to have the latest styles. So what happens to the old clothes, old clothes that you don't wear anymore, right?
Well, now, I mean, and this isn't, again, a revolutionary concept, but now there's a company. It's not a nonprofit. It operates to make money. They will mail you a bag in a little envelope, and you open it up, and it's this big bag. You stuff it full of clothes, and the minute that you ship it to them, you will get a credit on your account, which you can use to buy clothes that are made from recycled clothes. So in other words, you get credit for turning in the clothes you don't want anyway. And rather than throw them away and get nothing, you actually get money for your clothes, which you can use to do what? Buy new clothes.
And on a large scale, that could make a huge difference. And obviously people are being employed to then receive these clothes and recycle them and do them and make them. So, you're talking about creating of jobs and all of those kind of things. It's all great. And on a smaller scale, my daughters are wanting to downsize and things. And so one of their Christmas presents was their mother and I said, well, you get rid of your t-shirts and give them to us and we'll make you a blanket. So,
so they don't have to be thrown away.
Right. You don't have to throw them away, and you can turn what you were going to throw away into something that
has a use.
That has a use to keep you warm, since we live in a northern climate where blankets are important. It's small, it's tiny, but to your point, as a person who participates in that process with my wife to make these blankets, you have excess material. Now you've given me a place where I could contact to,
and it doesn't matter what condition it's in.
Right. I can take the excess material that we don't use from the t-shirts and send them to this place, and they can use it instead of us sitting here looking at it saying, what are we going to do with all this extra material that we're accumulating at our house?
So, again, those are just a few examples. And on a small local scale, you can talk about, you have kids that don't have job experience. You want to find them a good job. So you partner with a for-profit company who's going to try to make money, right? Hires kids, trains them, and gives them valuable skills. Everybody's making money, right? Because you're getting a job, you're learning skills you didn't have. The company's making money because it's accomplishing something it needed to. Now, is it making as much money as fast as it would have? No. But is it still making money? Yes. And it's doing something to improve, on a small scale, a local economy. And I guess the point is there you have a wide variety of different things that are taking place, right? Where you have companies operating to make money who are doing things that are net good, right? Net good. Not that there's not drawbacks, but I guess I'm encouraged by that as we want to believe that there is a noble future possible for capitalism. If you're one of those people that, wants to see us keep getting better as a country, but doesn't necessarily believe that, we want to go to socialism, this is kind of a toying with isn't there something in between?
Can we find something that works?
Can we make money, maybe less money, but can we still make good money, be successful, and do things that are good?
That are good for the economy as well as good for Mother Earth.
So, Lance, why do we have the show today?
We at True Chat have a mission to have these honest and open conversations with one another and our audience. And we did so today. And again, find the positives in your life. Find the positives in the world. It's going to make you a happier person, i.e. a better person. And if there are more of us walking around that are positive and better, then the whole world gets a little bit better. So there's my kumbaya for the new year. But at the same time,